Since last we spoke, there's been a lot of speculation about the destruction of the dam in eastern Ukraine. What is your take as to whether the Russians did this as an instrument of war, the Ukrainians did this to help them in their spring offensive, or it was just some sort of a neutral, non-military event?
I think the Ukrainians did it as part of their ongoing offensive or attempted offensive. There was nothing for Russia to gain by doing this. There was something for Ukraine to gain in terms of pushing Russian forces out of certain areas and then potentially creating an opening that they down the road might be able to do a cross-river attack. But I did see one video where there was an explosion. There had been some speculation that this was just an old plant that had not been properly cared for and it just deteriorated on its own. I don't think that's the case. But in any event, where we stand with it right now is Russia's evacuated the people that needed to be evacuated. It has not destroyed any of the Russian defensive lines, despite some of the earlier claims. And Russia's in a position that it can defend against whatever Ukraine decides to try to throw at it.
It seems as though, from comments from President Zelensky and public source observations, and maybe from your private source observations, that the so-called spring offensive has begun. And if that's the case, it's hardly something to call home about.
Yeah. Well, looks like it started 7-8 days ago. And it has not been a concerted, it's not been focused up on one point. It's been more like a shotgun, a scatter shot. And wherever Ukraine has tried to advance, as I've written about it, Scott Ritter has written about it, and General Doug McGregor has written about it, which is because Ukraine lacks air power. It doesn't have fixed-wing aircraft or rotary-wing aircraft, helicopters, that can fly forward, provide close air support for infantry formations, for tanks, for armored vehicles like the Bradley fighting vehicle, to protect them, to provide some sort of protection from above against attacks that they're going to face on the ground. Similarly, they don't have a lot of mobile artillery and air defense systems that can come along behind the advancing forces and take out any aircraft that the Russians are sending. So as a result, it's like in World War II, we had what was called the Mariana Turkey Shoot, where the U.S. naval force off the Philippines just shot down a massive number of Japanese aircraft. And what's happening now is massive numbers of Ukrainian armored formations and vehicles are being destroyed, and with it, the troops. The fatality rate for Ukrainian troops now, I think is approaching 8, 9, 10 to 1, and they can't continue to sustain such losses. So it's just, and they're being pushed into this by the West. I mean, this is criminal what's going on.
I want to get back to the dam in a minute, but the fatality losses of 8 or 9 to 1, that's extraordinary. I think you told me, and our audience, of course, in a prior interview, that an offensive would require a 2 or 3 to 1 advantage.
Correct.
You're telling me that these Ukrainians are at an 8 to 1 disadvantage. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so normally the conventional, military wisdom is that an attacking force should have at least 3 times the number of soldiers, vehicles, tanks as the defending force. They're going to need that in order to overwhelm the defended positions. Well, in this case, Ukraine doesn't have that kind of manpower compared to what Russia has, and yet it is attacking these positions, and it's losing upwards. I said in some cases 10 to 1. For every 1 Russian casualty, you're getting 10 Ukrainian casualties, which is just a horrific scale.
The documents that Jack Teixeira is accused of being the sole person responsible for revealing, you got to introduce it that way, so we're all talking about the same thing, indicated the awareness of the American government of a 7-to-1 kill ratio of Russia over Ukrainian. Everybody except Jack Devine accepted that number. He insisted it was 7-to-1 the other way, which of course is absurd. Now you're telling us it has become 8 or 9-to-1.
Correct. Now, because they're launching these attacks, and some of it was predicated on the belief that U.S. night vision goggles would be superior to anything that the Russians had, and that that's been a terrible mistake. The Russian helicopter pilots as well, they can sit off at some distances of like 10 kilometers and fire their missiles at the advancing armored vehicles, tanks, and take them out. So they don't have to get up real close and put themselves at risk of being shot down by a surface-to-air missile shoulder launch, such as the Stinger. So this is a NATO plan, and the problem is, Judge, not since World War II has the United States or the NATO countries fought maneuver warfare on an industrial scale, such as is happening now in Ukraine. The Russians have. The Russians have prepared and trained for that because they recognized they were going to have to defend against possible invasions of their country. So we have even our best generals don't have the experience in this. They don't have the training in it. It's just it's all theoretical. Driving tanks around the desert in Iraq against very poorly trained Iraqi troops does not even begin to match what is taking place on the ground in Ukraine. And learning some hard lessons, because I think the NATO folks are frankly shocked at how quickly these advanced Leopard tanks have been taken out of the battle. I mean, just like that. They didn't last more than a couple of hours.
What about those F-16s that the president boasted about when he was in Hiroshima? I gather they have not yet arrived, or if they have arrived, they haven't trained the Ukrainian pilots how to use them.
Biden's like that parent that's telling his kid, yeah, I'm going to get you a pony for Christmas. He just didn't specify it's Christmas. Those planes are a long ways off. They're not going to show up in the next month or two piloted by Ukrainian pilots. Now, there's always the possibility, and I've heard some rumblings about this, that in the desperation to try to save the situation, that NATO and the United States may actually put their own pilots in some of these aircraft and try to put them into the battle to help save Ukraine. If they do that, it's going to be disastrous for
Larry,
the West.
If they do that, it's World War III. If American fighter pilots are flying American F-16s that have been sold to the Germans and repurposed for our use, and they're shot down and their bodies come home in body bags, it's war.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's where we are headed towards that. There is the Biden administration cannot take its foot off the gas, and they're not willing to step back and recognize what is taking place on the ground. It would be one thing, I get accused of being a puppet of Putin and spelling out Russian disinformation, but facts are facts. The Ukrainian Air Force is virtually non-existent, and what it has is very limited in the operations it can carry out. They're not sitting there on ample supplies of tanks, nor do they have factories that are cranking out tanks or armored vehicles or artillery shells or artillery pieces. Russia has all that. Russia has probably after the United States, the second largest air force, at least in that theater, and they continue to build planes, tanks, artillery pieces, shells. Everything they need comes internally. They don't have to rely upon some foreign supply. And I just beg people to wrap their minds around the understand fact. Once you understand that, then you'll understand why Ukraine cannot win this war, even with support from NATO.